Now that Biden has stepped aside from running for a second term, Republicans are attacking Democrats, claiming they're ignoring democracy by pushing Kamala Harris without a single primary vote. But let's take a step back here. Do you know who else ran for president without the general population getting a say in the matter? George Washington. Oh, and Abraham Lincoln. And every single presidential candidate before 1972. You might not know this, but we've only been using primaries to democratically select party candidates for the last 50 years. Does that mean that everything came before it was undemocratic? I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. First of all, we've got to define democracy, and I think the simplest definition is a system of government by the whole population or eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. So far, so good in the U.S., where we have congressional elections every 2 years and a third of the Senate up for grabs in those 2 years, and a presidential election every 4 years. That sounds like democracy, right? But let's talk about the parts of our government that are no less legitimate despite being less democratic. Let's take the Supreme Court and the entire judicial branch. We elect the president who nominates justices and federal judges, as well as the senators who confirm them, but we don't directly elect those justices or judges. It was set up that way on purpose by the designers of our constitutional system, and I wouldn't take seriously anyone who claims that it's somehow illegitimate because it's not democratic. What about the military? There's no democracy there. We don't elect generals, and I don't see that as a threat to democracy either. But believe it or not, there's an even less democratic process for selecting arguably one of the most potentially powerful offices in America, vice presidential candidates. They are chosen by one person. J.D. Vance was picked by Trump. Kamala Harris was picked by Biden. Both are potentially a heartbeat away from the presidency without so much as a single vote by the people or their elected representatives, at least not in the primaries. That's certainly undemocratic. Yet I have not heard a single complaint from J.D. Vance, oddly enough, about that. Let's also look at Europe, where liberals often point to for policy inspiration. How many Western democracies do you think select their leaders through government-administered primaries? It's 0. So does that mean those aren't democracies? Of course not. Why are we in America so obsessed with primaries? I think they're part of the reason why general election candidates are often so unpopular. In 2016, only 28.5% of eligible voters participated in those primaries. It's about 14% per party. Back in 2000, only 17% of eligible voters participated. So 8.4% of eligible voters were responsible for giving us the human white noise machine Al Gore as the Democratic candidate for president. So why are we defending the system as democratic? 8.4%. Primaries tend to attract voters who are more extreme, further to the right or left in the general population, and this pushes politicians to the fringes of their parties to avoid being primaried by someone more extreme or pure. No wonder we end up holding our noses in November and voting for the lesser of two evils instead of a candidate that we genuinely support. Now, look, I think critics of Kamala Harris's path to the presidency this year have somewhat of a point. She did very, very poorly in the 2020 primary. She dropped out 8 weeks before any votes were cast. She will likely be nominated without competition at this year's Democratic convention. I believe Democrats missed an opportunity to have a real contest and find the best candidate for them to potentially win in November. But that being said, no one stepped up to challenge her, so she's going to be the nominee. If I had my way, parties would ditch the primaries completely and take responsibility for selecting their candidates. A party that picked bad candidates will lose. They'll eventually die out. The motivation to win is built into the process. I'm not saying we should go back to smoke-filled rooms necessarily, because I realize that's not realistic, although I do think that would be an improvement on the system that gave us broadly unpopular candidates like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But we do have recent examples of a better system. In 2021, the Virginia GOP, aiming to avoid another losing Trumpy nominee, opted for an unassembled convention instead of a primary. Around 30,000 pre-registered Republicans voted at nearly 40 sites using ranked choice voting. After 6 rounds of tabulation, Glenn Youngkin emerged as the candidate. And then he won the general election. And he hit a 58% approval rating 2 years into his term. So sure, 30,000 people is less than 10% of previous primary participants in Virginia, but the process yielded a better candidate and outcome for Republicans. And Virginians, I'd argue. Ranked choice voting moderates the field and rewards candidates with broader appeal. I do think there are some legitimate legal concerns about using ranked choice voting in general elections, but I would prefer it for primaries over our current system that keeps giving us candidates like Trump and Clinton and Biden. What do you think? Are these really the choices that represent America? Check out these videos if you want to dive deeper, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more principled political content.